This was a different kind of predator, one that studied, that adapted, that refused to play by the rules written for mere mortals. Khabib, however, knew better than to celebrate the moment. He had won a second, not the fight. Tyson's power was still terrifying, and the longer he allowed the boxer to find his rhythm, the more dangerous things would become. But there was something else gnawing at the back of Khabib's mind, something deeper than just the mechanics of the fight. It was the weight of history, the collision of two legacies that had never been meant to intersect. He had spent his entire life proving that discipline, control, and patience could dismantle even the wildest storms. Tyson had spent his proving that destruction, speed, and sheer will could tear through anything in their path. This wasn't just a fight. This was a battle of philosophies. The ring felt smaller now, the space between them charged with something more than competition. Tyson rolled his shoulders, his breathing measured, but beneath the surface, there was something burning, something that had been dormant for years. This fight had awoken a part of him that he hadn't felt since his prime. Khabib wasn't an easy target. He wasn't crumbling under pressure like so many others had. That meant Tyson had to reach into a place he hadn't visited in a long time, the place where monsters were made. The next exchange came like a thunderstorm. Tyson, adjusting his approach, feinted twice before launching a brutal body shot that finally landed. Khabib's body tensed, absorbing the blow, but the pain was immediate and undeniable. Tyson followed up, his instincts screaming for him to press forward, to turn this into the kind of war he thrived in. But Khabib, ever the strategist, refused to be swallowed by the storm. Instead of retreating, he advanced, stepping into Tyson's space once more, his forehead nearly brushing against the boxer's as he locked down movement, negating the barrage before it could reach its full force. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This wasn't supposed to happen. Khabib wasn't a striker. He wasn't a boxer. He was a grappler, a mauler, a man who drowned his opponents in the grind of the mat. And yet, here he was, standing toe-to-toe with one of the greatest knockout artists the world had ever seen, and he was still here. In the audience, unseen by cameras but watching intently, sat men who had once trained with legends, men who understood the subtleties of combat beyond what the casual viewer could see. One of them, an old trainer with hands calloused from years of holding pads for champions, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't just watching a fight. He was watching two timelines colliding. He had seen Tyson dismantle giants. He had watched Khabib reduce elite fighters to desperate, broken men. But this was something else entirely. The fight pressed on, neither man yielding an inch. Tyson, knowing that a drawn-out battle would favor the younger man, pushed the pace, forcing Khabib to react rather than dictate. Khabib, refusing to be bullied, responded not with power, but with intelligence, using angles and movement to smother Tyson's ability to land clean. It was a contest of wills as much as skill, a battle between fire and ice. Somewhere beyond the ring, in the quiet halls where legends were etched into history, whispers had already begun. If Tyson won, it would be a validation of the old world, the proof that raw, unfiltered aggression could still reign supreme. If Khabib won, it would be something else entirely, a rewriting of the rules, a demonstration that discipline could neutralize even the most devastating force. But before history could decide, before the world could witness its verdict, something happened that neither man expected. A sound, a voice, a disturbance in the atmosphere. And just like that, the fight took a turn that no one saw coming. Somewhere in the crowd, just beyond the sea of flashing lights and roaring voices, a commotion stirred. It wasn't loud at first, just a ripple in the atmosphere, an unease that spread like a cold wind before a storm. Tyson and Khabib were locked in battle, oblivious to the outside world, but the audience had begun to shift, their attention split between the war inside the ring and whatever was happening beyond it. Then, a single voice cut through the noise, not a scream of excitement or a cheer of support, but something else. Urgent. Panicked. A shout that didn't belong in a night of sport. For a fraction of a second, Tyson's eyes flickered toward the disturbance. It was nothing, a flash of movement in the periphery, something his years of instinct told him to ignore. In the ring, a lapse in focus, no matter how brief, was a mistake. But Khabib, ever watchful, caught it. He didn't strike, didn't take advantage of the momentary distraction, but his mind registered the shift. Something was wrong. He could feel it now. The energy had changed. The electric intensity of the fight interrupted by something neither of them could control. Then it happened. A crash. A body hitting the floor outside the ring. People scrambled back as a figure tumbled over the barricade, landing hard on the ground. Security surged forward, but the damage was done. The illusion of the event, the controlled chaos of combat, had been shattered by the real world bleeding through its edges. Tyson took a step back, his breath steady, but his muscles coiled, ready for anything. Khabib's gaze shifted, reading the moment, piecing together what little he could from the confusion unraveling around them. And then, from somewhere deep within the chaos, a voice rang out, a voice both men recognized. Not as a friend, not as an ally, but as a ghost from the past. The sound of it froze the air. Tyson's face darkened, the flicker of something buried long ago surfacing in his eyes. Khabib, ever the tactician, didn't react outwardly, but inside, his instincts screamed. This wasn't part of the fight. This was something else. Something bigger. The announcers, desperate to regain control of the narrative, scrambled to keep the focus on the ring, but the crowd was no longer just watching a fight. They were witnessing a moment that no one had prepared for. Tyson exhaled slowly, his fists tightening. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. Khabib didn't speak, but his expression said enough. He had stepped into this ring prepared to face one man. Now, it seemed, he was facing something far more dangerous. And the fight, once bound by rules, history, and expectations, had just become something else entirely. A heavy silence settled over the arena, a stark contrast to the thunderous energy that had filled it moments ago. Tyson's fists clenched at his sides, his breathing measured, but his posture rigid. Khabib, ever composed, remained still, his eyes shifting toward the source of the voice that had shattered the illusion of this being just another fight. Then, from the shadows beyond the barricades, a figure stepped into view. The reaction from the crowd was immediate. Some gasped, others murmured in disbelief. Whoever this was, they weren't a stranger to the world of combat. Tyson's expression darkened as recognition hit him. This wasn't just a random interruption. This was deliberate. The man standing there, just beyond the ropes, wasn't some fan who had lost control or an overzealous supporter looking for attention. He was someone from Tyson's past, someone who had no reason to be here unless he wanted to make a statement. Khabib noticed the way Tyson's stance changed. This was no longer just a fight between two champions. This was something personal. Security hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. The officials at ringside whispered frantically, debating whether to call off the fight, but neither Tyson nor Khabib made a move to leave. The tension was unbearable. Then, the figure outside the ring smirked and said something that only Tyson could hear. Whatever it was, it hit deep. Tyson exhaled sharply, nostrils flaring, and in an instant, he turned back to Khabib, nodding as if coming to a decision. And then, as if the interruption had never happened, he attacked. Khabib barely had time to react before Tyson exploded forward, unleashing a combination with the kind of ferocity that had once made him the most feared man on the planet. It wasn't just aggression, it was controlled devastation. A left hook snapped Khabib's head to the side, and for the first time, the undefeated warrior stumbled. The crowd erupted, the noise deafening, but Khabib refused to go down. His instincts, sharpened by years of combat, took over. He ducked under the next punch, pivoted, and closed the distance before Tyson could reset. The game had changed. It was no longer about patience. It was about survival. Tyson, fueled by something deeper than competition, swung again, but this time, Khabib caught his arm mid-motion. A moment of struggle. Power against technique. Then, in a blink, Khabib twisted his body and sent Tyson crashing to the mat with a trip so smooth it looked effortless. Gasps filled the arena as the impossible happened. Tyson, the man who had built his legacy on standing tall, was now on his back. For a second, neither man moved. Tyson, stunned but not beaten, locked eyes with Khabib. There was no fear in them, only understanding. Then, in an act that no one expected, Khabib stepped back and let Tyson rise. It wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't about proving superiority. This fight wasn't about who could keep the other down. It was about something far greater. Tyson got to his feet, wiping the sweat from his face, and nodded. No words were needed. The fight had spoken for them. The bell rang, signaling the end, but in that moment, the winner didn't matter. The crowd, the officials, the cameras, all of them were secondary to what had just happened. And then, just as things seemed to settle, the figure outside the ring turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind only unanswered questions. The world would talk about this fight for years. Not just because two legends had clashed, but because, on this night, something else had been set into motion. Something no one had seen coming. The air crackled with anticipation as the towering silhouette of Mike Tyson stepped into the ring, his every movement a reminder of the sheer devastation he once brought to boxing's heavyweight division. Across from him, Khabib Nurmagomedov stood motionless, his expression unreadable, his stance firm, carrying the aura of an undefeated warrior who had conquered everything the octagon had to offer. The world had never seen a matchup like this, an unstoppable force of boxing's golden age against the immovable object of modern MMA dominance. The question wasn't just who would win, but whether the ring could contain the collision of these two legends. The moment the bell rang, time seemed to slow. Tyson, a man whose fists once shattered the will of giants, inched forward with that signature peekaboo stance, his shoulders rolling, his eyes locked onto Khabib with the hunger of a predator sizing up prey. Khabib, a master of control, didn't flinch. His game had always been about patience, about letting his opponents reveal their weaknesses before dragging them into deep, suffocating waters. But this wasn't the octagon. There were no takedowns, no smothering ground control. This was Tyson's world, and Khabib had willingly walked into it. The crowd was on its feet, torn between two legacies that had never been meant to cross paths. Tyson feinted left and lunged with a short, devastating right hook, testing the waters. Khabib's instincts took over, his feet pivoting just enough to deflect the impact, but the sheer force sent a shock through his frame. The impact wasn't just physical, it was a message. This was no ordinary striker. This was Mike Tyson, the man who sent champions crumbling in seconds. Yet, Khabib didn't step back. If anything, his expression hardened. He had faced pressure before. He had felt the storm of Conor's venomous precision, the suffocating power of Gaethje, and the relentless aggression of Poirier. None had broken him. He wasn't about to start now. Tyson smirked, reading the silent defiance in Khabib's stance. He had fought fear. He had fought desperation. But this was different. This was a man who didn't see Tyson as an executioner, only as another challenge to solve. The thought intrigued him, and for a brief moment, a flicker of respect passed through his mind. Then he did what he had always done. He attacked. A lightning-fast jab. A hook to the ribs. A short uppercut meant to split defenses before Khabib could react. But this wasn't the same Tyson from the old days. He wasn't 20 anymore. And Khabib, even outside his comfort zone, was a strategist first, a warrior second. He absorbed the damage, analyzing the rhythm, the angles, the openings. He wasn't trying to trade blows. He was looking for control. Then something happened that no one expected. As Tyson launched another punishing combination, Khabib did what had been drilled into his bones since childhood. He closed the distance. Not recklessly, not with desperation, but with precision. In a heartbeat, he was inside Tyson's range, chest to chest, disrupting the boxing legend's devastating power. It wasn't a clinch. It was control. A split second of calculated chaos where Khabib dictated the pace. Tyson's instincts screamed to disengage, but the grip, the positioning, Khabib was suffocating without even using the tools he had mastered in the cage. For the first time, the crowd saw doubt flicker in Tyson's eyes. But doubt was a dangerous thing. It could weaken some men, but for Tyson, it only ignited something deeper. With a raw, explosive twist, he ripped himself free, creating just enough space to unleash a hook that came like a bolt of lightning. The air shifted, and even before the impact landed, the world seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment. This was where one legacy would begin to bend. And then darkness. The screen cut to black. Silence hung in the air, leaving only the echo of the last second, the last breath, the last moment of uncertainty. What happened next would define everything. A flash of motion. A blur of power. The moment of impact, except it never came. Just before Tyson's fist could meet its mark, Khabib's body shifted, a movement so subtle yet so precise that it felt like he had read the punch before it was thrown. The force of the swing cut through empty space, Tyson's knuckles grazing nothing but air, and in that instant, a change rippled through the fight. The crowd, roaring only a moment ago, now held their breath, as if they too had sensed it. Something had shifted. Tyson's entire life had been built on one thing: breaking men before they could think. His fists weren't weapons, they were inevitabilities. Once he committed to a punch, it landed. It hurt. It finished. But Khabib had done what few had ever managed. He had taken a step ahead of the storm instead of bracing against it. The former heavyweight champion narrowed his eyes, recalculating. This wasn't an opponent he could simply overwhelm.